Hey guys, tonight we drift through the thick, suspicious skies of Mount Olympus, where the clouds hang heavy not with rain, but with drama. It's one of those nights where you swear the heavens are glaring at you sideways. You walk across a pale marble veranda, your sandals sticking slightly with every sleepy step as a low rumble echoes somewhere behind the hills. Thunder maybe, or maybe it's just Hera's temper stretching its legs again. To your left, golden bowls steam with fragrant oils, lavender olive one, suspiciously labeled ambrosia of plausible deniability. You lean against a chilled pillar and catch sight of Hera herself, perched beside a sky map and muttering about weather anomalies. Her fingers adorned with rings too sharp for casual royalty trace erratic cloud formations with the intensity of someone solving crimes that haven't happened yet. You probably won't survive this unless you're fluent in divine passive aggression and have a backup toga for storm-related drama. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know if you're slipping into sleep in Sao Paulo or procrastinating past midnight in Prague. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You ease around the column and listen more closely. Hera's voice sharpens as she names a very specific cloud, one shaped oddly like a woman clutching a harp and a half-eaten grape. She squints, her lips twist. Her suspicion hovers like a mosquito you can't quite slap. This isn't your average atmospheric curiosity. This is a marital inquisition. Mainstream historians agree Hera had a reputation for noticing divine nonsense faster than anyone else. She wasn't fooled by swans, bulls, or clouds. But this fluffy, harp-hugging imposter, it gets under her skin, literally. She orders a mild storm to prod it gently, which translates to 3 hours of sideways wind in a 5-mile radius. And that's how Nephele enters the story, except no one calls her that yet. For now, she's just that suspicious cumulonimbus over Thessaly. Here's where it gets weird. Zeus, trying to dodge accountability, like it's an Olympic sport, transforms a nymph into that cloud. A full-bodied, harp-carrying, musically inclined cumulus woman. Wishy, because he thought Hera wouldn't suspect the weather, which is like hiding your affair in a fire alarm and hoping no one pulls it. Fringe lore suggests the nymph wasn't even part of the plan. Some say she wandered too close to Olympus, caught a stray bolt of romantic intention, and puffed into existence mid-verse of an awkward lyre song. Others claim Zeus was trying to create art and invented a sentient cloud by mistake. Historians still argue whether Nephele was truly sentient or simply a condensation-based misunderstanding. Either way, you now have Hera versus a cloud. And not just any cloud, a semi-sentient sky being who floats poetically at sunset and hums lullabies into the breeze. Hera naturally hates her. You trail behind Hera as she dons a cloak that literally crackles with static, purely decorative, she insists, and begins charting wind behavior. You pass scrolls with titles like Anomalous Fluffiness in the Aegean Sector, and that is not a normal breeze. Over the next few days, she watches, she squints, she stabs a quill into cloud maps and mutters things like, "It winked at me," and that cloud just played an F sharp. Meanwhile, Nephele, still a cloud, begins drifting farther, her soft edges tinged with gold and coral. She doesn't speak, but she does pulse slightly when Zeus is near like a lovesick foghorn. And that's not helping her case. Hera starts drawing constellations shaped like red flags. The gods around her pretend not to notice. Apollo suddenly becomes obsessed with underground music. Hermes invents a new postal route that conveniently avoids Hera's watchtower. Athena claims she's in her quiet era and wears reflective armor to dodge eye contact. You sit on a low wall as Hera rolls out a parchment so long it trips over the horizon. Her handwriting grows pointier with every update. And then she says it. That is not a cloud. That is something pretending to be a cloud. The wind dies a little, Somewhere a lyre string snaps, and just like that, the sky becomes personal. You stand there for a while trying to look invisible, which is hard when you're surrounded by vengeful deities and weaponized weather patterns. Hera hasn't blinked in a few minutes, which is usually a sign she's either devising a very efficient revenge or mentally alphabetizing every insult Zeus has ever thrown at marital fidelity. Down below in the mortal world, the cloud drifts over Boeotia. Farmers glance up. Sheep blink at it. A toddler points and says, "Look." A lady with hair, which doesn't help Hera's mood one bit. She mutters something about delusions of innocence and dispatches a low-flying thunderhead to observe. Not strike, just hover intimidatingly like a divine bodyguard with trust issues. Mainstream historians note that in Greek myth, Hera's wrath was often reserved for the wrong target, not out of malice, but because the right one kept hiding behind divine loopholes. Zeus, for example, had already moved on to chasing some other nymph disguised as a nightingale, leaving poor Nephele his accidental cloud floating like a dreamy scapegoat in an increasingly awkward sky. You take a few cautious steps as Hera composes a memo. The heading reads, "Notes on Suspicious Weather Formations Vol. I, Why I Don't Trust Fluffy Things." In it, she lists several grievances. That time, a cloud rained sideways just as she was giving a speech. That time, a different cloud resembled her sister-in-law and ruined her temple unveiling. That time, this cloud shimmered pink while Zeus was humming. Fringe mythographers actually suggest that Hera may have been onto something. One papyrus fragment attributed to a now-lost comedic playwright named Epicharmos the Younger jokes that Zeus once disguised a whole romance inside a weather forecast. Scholars still argue whether this line was metaphorical or a literal nod to divine shape-shifting. Either way, Hera wasn't laughing. She storms into the assembly hall of Olympus, which smells faintly of incense and drama. Dionysus is asleep on a throne made entirely of empty goblets. Poseidon is braiding kelp into his beard. Hera clears her throat and the room tenses. "I demand an investigation into atmospheric misconduct," she announces, voice like cold brass. Zeus, lounging nearby in a toga that screams guilty vacation, Dad raises one eyebrow. "A what now?" "That cloud," she hisses, jabbing a finger toward the nearest open window. She winked at me. The room falls silent. Even the goblets stop clinking. Aphrodite looks over from her reflection and mutters, "Oof." Zeus, attempting to look casual, says, "You sure it wasn't just condensation?" Hera's gaze could bend steel. "I know a cloud flirting when I see it." You inch backward. The air feels like it's about to be cut with a lightning bolt. To distract herself from homicide, Hera decides to make Nephele mortal. Not destroy her? Oh no, that would be too merciful. Instead, she consults the Fates, who are surprisingly cooperative, once bribed with fresh yarn and scandalous gossip. Thus, Nephele is pulled from the sky like a dream being reverse-engineered into a person. She materializes near Mount Pelion, wrapped in mist harp still in hand. Her eyes are cloudy, pun intended, and her voice carries the cadence of storms trying to apologize. Mainstream accounts say she was stunning, eerie, and slightly confused about doors. You watch from a high balcony as Hera folds her arms. Let's see how charming she is without 12,000 feet of altitude and 3 romantic sunsets a day. Here's the twist. Nephele doesn't chase Zeus. She doesn't even notice him. She wanders the foothills, humming to flowers, sits under trees, and only asks if anyone has seen a voice like thunder that smells like oak. The local villagers think she's a wind goddess in disguise and start offering her bowls of honey and reeds. One old woman hands her a blanket. Nephele wraps it around herself, leans into the hillside, and sighs like she just realized she's mortal, and it's not half bad. That's when Hera starts to panic a little. Because the cloud was easier to dismiss, but now there's a mortal woman out there who accidentally inspires worship just by existing. And Hera doesn't trust mortal awe one bit. Historians still argue whether Hera truly felt threatened by Nephele, or if she simply couldn't let go of the cloud thing. Fringe writers say it was more existential. Nephilim, represented everything. Hera hated. Softness mistaken for powerlessness, beauty mistaken for foolishness, affection that didn't need validation. You lean against the balcony rail and whisper to no one in particular, "She's not mad because Zeus fell for a cloud. She's mad because the cloud never needed him." And that, dear listener, is how grudges gain thunder. You trail after Nephilim, who, despite technically being born this morning, walks with the sleepy calm of someone who's already lived 1,000 evenings. She hums as she steps over stones, the notes curling around pine trunks and pooling under mossy ridges like lazy streams of song. She doesn't ask questions. She doesn't look back. She just wanders. Meanwhile, on Olympus, Hera is pacing so hard the clouds beneath the palace have developed friction burns. She's still glowing. Hera grumbles. Mortals aren't supposed to glow. Zeus is conveniently inspecting the tides, which basically means Poseidon built him a couch on the beach, and told him not to come back until he'd figured out how to look innocent in public again. You glance at Hera and wonder if the concept of letting things go was ever included in her divine job description. Back on Earth, Nephilim reaches a village near the river. The people there are startled mainly because she's barefoot, radiating soft mist, and still looks vaguely like someone who could summon weather patterns with a sigh. Mainstream historians tell us that the ancient Greeks had a specific word theon for that eerie, divine glow, something that marked certain beings as touched by the gods. Nephilim had that glow in spades, though she didn't seem to know it. Or care. She was far more interested in learning why goats kept following her. One shepherd, hoping to impress her, offers a flute made of bone. She thanks him with such sincerity that he instantly composes a ballad about her eyebrows. He's not even a musician. He just feels compelled. Hera, watching from a thundercloud, nearly bites through her golden goblet. Fringe archaeologists once uncovered a series of early pottery shards depicting a lady wrapped in fog surrounded by animals and extremely confused villagers. Scholars still argue whether these images refer to Nephilim or to that one-time Dionysus lost a bet and turned himself into a sheep whisperer for a week. Either way, Nephilim becomes a kind of mild folk legend in the region. Children claim her breath smells like rain. Elders say her feet never leave footprints. One overly poetic merchant swears she sings in her sleep, and it grows olive branches. None of this sits well with Hera. But what's worse, infinitely worse, is that mortals start leaving offerings to her. Not big ones, just little gestures. A sprig of thyme, a bit of honeycomb, a poem carved into the bark of a cypress. She's stealing worship, Hera growls. Do you know how long it took me to get my name on temple walls? You try to suggest that maybe this whole thing isn't about jealousy, it's about control. But Hera's glare melts your sandals. So you do the only sensible thing, you teleport to the mortal realm and hang out near Nephilim, who is currently learning how to cook lentils from a kindly widow. The woman stirs slowly and tells her that being human is about patience, that the sky moves too quickly for peace, that sometimes the best thing to do is sit still until something finds you worth orbiting. You quietly jot that down on a leaf because, wow. And just like that, Nephilim begins to change. She doesn't stop glowing exactly, but it softens. Her voice gets a little deeper. Her laughter takes on warmth instead of thunder. She helps build a small shrine, not to herself but to the river. Mainstream historians note that many early deities or semi-divine figures were absorbed into local natural cults, sometimes even rebranded as nymphs or seasonal spirits. Nephilim might be one of the earliest examples of this. Or, as one scholar quipped, she's the first influencer who went off-grid. Here's the kicker: she starts turning down worship. Oh no, she tells one boy offering figs. That's too much. Take that home to your grandmother. She's more powerful than I am. The villagers adore her more for it. You glance up at the sky, half expecting Hera to go full soap opera villain and crash a thunderbolt into the lentil pot. But she doesn't. Instead, she does something worse. She sends a dream. That night, as Nephilim sleeps in a bed of reeds near the water's edge, a mist curls around her mind. In it, she sees Zeus not as he is now, but as she remembers him, a voice, a warmth, a presence she once wrapped around like a cloak. It's comforting and devastating, not romantic, just familiar. When she wakes, her eyes are wet. Not because she misses him, but because she's starting to remember being a cloud and realizing how much simpler things were before she had to make choices. You don't say anything, you just sit nearby watching the stars. One of them falls. "Do mortals always feel this much?" she asks finally. You nod. It's part of the package. She smiles, but it's a sad smile. The kind clouds probably never had to learn. You wake to the scent of wild fennel and the faint sounds of temple bells somewhere upriver. Nephele's already up knee-deep in the stream trying to teach frogs how to harmonize. It's not going well, but you admire her dedication. Her eyes have changed. Not the color, still that soft gray-green of a storm, about to ask if you have a minute to talk about your emotional stability. But now they hold something else. A flicker, a weight. That dream from Hera still lingers in her muscles. She splashes over and tells you she wants to travel. Just a bit. Just to see what else the world offers besides goats and lentils and awkward shepherd poetry. You agree, it's time. So you head south toward the hills where olives grow and cicadas never shut up. The sun is lazier here, dripping through tree branches like old honey. Nephele trails her fingers along bark and marvels at the dry soil. It feels thirsty, she says, crouching to press her palm to the ground. Here's your mainstream fact for the night. The cultivation of olive trees in ancient Greece began as early as the 3rd millennium BCE. Olives weren't just food, they were politics, currency, skincare, and sacred offerings rolled into one fruit that somehow takes a decade to taste good. The trees thrived in dry, rocky soil where other crops would sulk and wither. And according to myth, or at least a version whispered by candlelight, this region was where Athena once stood across from Poseidon in a contest for a city. Poseidon offered a saltwater spring by smashing his trident into the rock. Athena offered an olive tree, delicate and resilient. You don't tell Nephele this yet. You're trying to let her discover things on her own. As you walk, a farmer invites you both to join dinner under a crooked pergola. Bread, olives, pickled garlic, and a jug of something fermented enough to politely ask your liver for ID. Nephele drinks a little and then giggles for 10 straight minutes when the jug says her name. Later, lying under stars, she tells you she remembers being wind, not air, not breeze, but wind. Fast and directionless and everywhere at once. I liked being part of everything, she whispers, but I like being someone too. You nod, chewing on a fig stem. Suddenly, a low tremble in the sky. A rumble you feel in your molars. You look up. Hera's watching again, and tonight she's in mood. She sends a drizzle. Nothing serious. Just the emotional equivalent of an ex texting hope you're well with a dagger emoji. Nephele leans back into the rainfall. It doesn't scare her anymore. She lets it soak into her, smiling like she knows it's a tantrum and she's not giving it power. This is what Hera hates most. You wake the next morning to find a temple being built. Just a small one. Out of gratitude, out of superstition, out of awe. Nephele didn't ask for this. She tried to redirect them to dedicate it to Artemis, maybe, or Demeter. But the villagers are stubborn. You bring the right kind of rain, they say. You help things grow. You whisper to Nephele, you don't have to accept this. I'm not, she says, but I won't break their hope either. Fringe tidbit time. In certain Hellenic microcults, unnamed female spirits were venerated at rural shrines, figures who weren't gods but weren't quite mortal either. Offerings of olive oil, woven fabric, and carved tokens were left under trees believed to hum softly during storms. Some historians believe these were remnant worships of figures like Nephele, weather-born women too gentle for Olympus but too important to forget. Historians still argue whether Nephele ever actually received temple offerings or if her image was retroactively stitched into old stories to give them poetic mist. Either way, the villagers still bake honey cakes on her festival day. You spend a week there. Nephele learns to knead bread and how to tell if grapes are lying about being ripe. You catch her staring at the hills one night and you know she's thinking of leaving again. And that's when Hermes shows up, not with a trumpet or scroll or dramatic entrance, just appears. Shirt unbuttoned, dust on his sandals, eyes like he knows every word you haven't said yet. He leans against a fig tree and offers her a pomegranate. Dad says you've had enough fun. You bristle. Nephele doesn't. Tell him I'm not property, she says calmly. Hermes shrugs. I just deliver messages. But Hera, she's not sending words anymore. She's sending omens. And if you stay here too long, you'll start noticing your neighbors grow sick. Your goats miscarry. Your springs turn brackish. You stare at him. She wouldn't do that. Hermes arches a brow. She absolutely would. And Nephele believes it. Not because she's afraid of Hera, but because she knows clouds and gods and resentment that festers longer than wine can sweeten. That night, she doesn't sleep. She just watches the olive branches sway and wonders whether anything she builds can ever be hers. You leave before dawn. No dramatic goodbyes, no farewell feasts, just a quiet walk away from the half-built temple and a trail of olive leaves in your wake. Nephele doesn't look back and you don't ask if she's sad. You already know. It's that specific kind of sadness that smells like morning dew and missed opportunities. You follow goat paths south toward a place known only in whispers Thermos, the village with no wells. It hasn't rained there in months, and you've heard that even the moss packed up and left. As you hike, you ask Nephele what she thinks Hera actually wants. To win, she says without hesitation. Win what? Everything. You nod slowly. That tracks. Mainstream, fact incoming. Hera, queen of the gods, was widely worshipped throughout Greece, but often portrayed with a complicated reputation, part maternal protector, part cosmic grudge holder. In art and myth, she's both regal and wrathful, revered and feared. Temples to Hera, especially in places like Samos and Argos, rivaled even those to Zeus. She was not a background deity. She was the headline. But Thermos doesn't have a temple not to Hera or anyone else. Just a flat hill, a few dying fig trees, and a population that talks more to their goats than to each other. When you arrive, you're immediately hit by the dryness. Your tongue sticks to your teeth. Your sweat evaporates before it can think about causing embarrassment. And still, Nephele walks calmly, almost humming. She crouches and presses her hand to the earth again. It's hard as fired clay. This place is dying, she murmurs. But it's not finished yet. That night, while the villagers grumble and oil their cracked lips, Nephele climbs to the ridge above the hill. You follow reluctantly, chewing on air and regretting every fig you've ever judged too harshly. At the top, she lifts her arms, not dramatically, not in some grand invocation, just lifts them palms open. The sky stirs, slowly, unwillingly, and then a drop. Not enough to help, just enough to tease. She drops her hands and sighs. I can't force it, she mutters. If I do, Hera will know. You think she's not already watching. She's always watching. And she's right, because across the ridge a woman appears. Not Hera, not yet, but one of her proxies. A thistle-haired dryad with a necklace of cicada shells and eyes that shine like moldy silver. She speaks without moving her mouth. Tell the sky thing it cannot steal from Olympus. Its breath is borrowed. Its softness is heresy. Fringe. Tidbit for your bedtime mind. Some Hellenistic texts describe lesser spirits, perhaps imagined or mistranslated, who acted as mood scouts for the gods. These whisperers didn't wage war or deliver punishment, they simply appeared and made you feel things: guilt, fear, restlessness. They were classified by some ancient scribes as subliminal nymphs. You might know them better as that weird vibe in a hotel room. Historians still argue whether these subliminal nymphs were ever meant to be real entities or just poetic metaphors for mental distress. But tell that to the chill crawling up your spine. Nephele doesn't answer the dryad. She just turns and walks back toward the hill, muttering something about needing marjoram. You follow because that's what you do. Now follow the girl who used to be a cloud and now maybe wants to be a god, or a baker, or both. The next day, she meets with the village elder, a woman whose wrinkles have their own zip code. Naphael explains how to make a steam pit lined with herbs and copper shards. If we build it right, she says, the moisture from the night air will condense and trickle down. It won't be much, she adds, but it'll be ours. And that's when you notice it, the change. Not in the air, not in the clouds, but in the people. They believe her. They want to believe her. Not because she made it rain, but because she didn't promise to. That night, the villagers cook what little they have, a soup that tastes like hope and wild thyme. Naphael drinks it in silence, watching the sky again. Later, when you're alone, she tells you something strange. When I was a cloud, she whispers, I could hear songs from under the ground. Roots singing, rivers whispering, stones humming in long, slow vowels. You blink. And now I just hear my heartbeat. She presses your hand to her chest. It's steady. It's human. But somewhere far off, you hear thunder that doesn't sound natural. You dream of thunder. Not the kind that crashes or rattles your windows like a drunk centaur looking for a tavern fight, but the kind that simmers. A low, unceasing growl that curls beneath your skin like a warning written in sound. And when you open your eyes, it's still there. Nephele is already up. She's at the ridge again, barefoot, on stone arms tucked into herself like she's trying not to unravel. You sit beside her and wait for her to speak. She doesn't. Instead, she points to a patch of sky that looks off, slightly bruised like it's hiding something. You feel that she asks. You nod. What is it? She pauses, then flatly jealousy. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks didn't always separate natural events from emotional ones. Earthquakes weren't tectonic shifts, they were Poseidon's tantrums. Plagues weren't bacterial, they were Apollo's silent arrows. Weather in particular was seen as highly emotional. Thunder was Hera's grudge, lightning Zeus's ego. A sudden drought could mean someone nearby forgot to pray, or worse, married someone the gods didn't like. So when the skies over Thermos begin to rumble without a storm in sight, everyone knows something or someone has been offended. Nephele spends the day gathering herbs again, not the pleasant ones. She's reaching for the bitter stalks, the ones goats won't eat, and children don't draw. She mixes them into a paste, smears it across her arms, her collarbone, her throat. You watch. Camouflage, you ask. Signal, she replies. And you realize she wants Hera to see her. That night, the sky responds. It doesn't crack open. It doesn't roar. It flickers, like it's winking, like it's testing the idea of destruction but hasn't committed yet. Then a new arrival, a man maybe. Hard to tell. His robes look like they've been stitched from cloud banks. His eyes glow gold, which is normally reserved for gods, monsters, and salesmen trying too hard. He doesn't speak, just opens his mouth and lets out a sound like falling marble. You flinch. Nephele doesn't. She walks up to him and says very calmly, "Tell Hera I remember." The man doesn't answer, just vanishes like a sneeze in a breeze. Fringe tidbit. Some lost Orphic hymns describe Hera not only as the goddess of marriage and queenship, but as the mistress of memory theft. One fragment suggests she could remove dreams from mortals who offended her. A few even hint that clouds once carried thoughts across continents before Hera cursed them into silence. That might explain why some ancient cultures saw mist as a thief stealing landmarks, muffling sounds, even confusing time. Historians still argue whether these Orphic references were meant to be literal or symbolic. But when Nephele mutters, "She stole my name first," you start to think symbols might be realer than we admit. Back in the village, things are twitchy. The elder tells you that crops are wilting overnight. Not from pests, just wilting like they've lost the will to grow. A toddler keeps pointing at puddles that aren't there. And one goat refuses to eat unless someone sings to it in Dorian mode. Nephele takes it all in stride. She's preparing something, stones etched with sigils, fire pits lined in ash, tiny clay jars filled with river silt and copper filings. You try to ask what it's for, but she just says, I have to remind the sky who I am. You don't press her. Later that night, while the village tries to sleep through static and sighs in the wind, you watch her climb the fig tree on the ridge. At the top, she holds her hands open again, but this time there's no hope in the gesture, just defiance. A single streak of cloud parts the sky, curving like a question mark over Thermos. The thunder begins again. But it's not angry, it's laughing. You don't dream at all. Which is weird because usually when things go wrong, really wrong, your brain at least tosses you a nonsensical montage of flying goats, misfiled taxes, or X's morphing into mythical creatures. But not this time. Just a blank black curtain, like someone forgot to hit play. When you wake up, the sky smells like burned wool. You find Nephil still up, crouched beside the ridge fire. Her palms are coated in ash. She doesn't speak, just nods towards the village square. You head there slowly, unsure what horror or hilarity awaits. What you find is theater. The villagers are gathered in silence, facing a makeshift stage built overnight from figwood planks and scavenged crates. On it stands an old woman, one of the herb sellers. Her arms are outstretched and she's reciting something in a language you can't quite place. Not Greek, not dialect. It sounds like wind forced through a keyhole. The villagers watch mesmerized. Then one begins to cry. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greek theater didn't begin as entertainment. It was ritual and offering to the gods, especially Dionysus. Every tragedy, every chorus was first and foremost a sacrament. Audiences weren't just viewers, they were witnesses. Drama wasn't drama. It was purification. They called it catharsis, and it wasn't always pleasant. Fringe tidbit. A little-known cult in northern Arcadia believed that performance could ward off divine attention. They didn't pray, they acted. The idea was simple. If gods watched humans like we binge reality shows, then a convincing reenactment might satisfy them enough to stop meddling. Historians still argue whether such performances were theater or coded confessionals. But watching that woman act out the moment Hera banished clouds from Olympus, complete with thunder snap sound effects made from hollow gourds, you start to wonder if it's both. Nephele joins you whispering, "She's telling my story." And indeed, the old woman's tale is familiar. A cloud-formed girl, molded from memory, raised in secrecy, cursed by Hera to dissolve if spoken of aloud. You realize with a jolt, this isn't just theater, it's restoration. You glance up at the sky. No laughter now, just silence. Back at the fig tree, Nephele climbs again. Not to signal this time, but to watch. She spreads her arms and leans into the breeze, almost daring it to carry her away. You stay below, scanning the crowd. Everyone is quiet now, spellbound. Then the wind shifts, and for a moment you smell olives. Not the pickled, briny kind from your last midnight snack mistake. No, this is richer, earthier, like the scent of an orchard you've never been to but somehow miss. You close your eyes, and in that instant it feels like the cloud girl is everywhere. Fringe detail. One lost Pythagorean fragment claims clouds can retain emotional residue like wool soaking up dye. If that's true, then maybe storms aren't rage, maybe they're memory leaks. You open your eyes again, and there's Hera. No thunder, no lightning, no fire from the heavens. Just a woman in a blue cloak, arms crossed, standing near the fig tree. Her eyes are ancient, not cruel, just exhausted. Like someone who's been trying to balance too many grudges on too few plates. She speaks, only 2 words. Not again. Then vanishes. Nephele doesn't smile. She just climbs down. Later that night, the villagers sleep more soundly than they have in weeks. No static, no flickers, just stillness. You stay awake because Nephele is packing. You ask where she's going. She shrugs, somewhere windier. Will you be okay? She looks at you like that's a silly question. I'm a cloud. I don't do okay. I do drift. And then she's gone. But the next time you see a curl of mist, that lingers a little too long around a temple roof or a patch of sky that forgets to turn blue, you might just remember her. And maybe that's enough. You sit alone by the fig tree. It's not much of a tree, really. A bit crooked, scarred on one side from some forgotten lightning strike. The bark peels like sunburnt skin, but tonight it's quiet. The wind has settled into something soft, just enough rustle to remind you the world isn't entirely asleep. You start stacking little stones at its base, for no reason really, just something to do while your thoughts settle. One smooth pebble, one sharp flake, one flat chip. It builds into a tiny tower teetering at 4 high, then 5, then 6. And on the 7th, something flickers. You don't move, don't breathe, just glance sideways. A shimmer of cloud, only knee-high curls behind the tree like a cat that forgot how to be solid. You whisper, Nephele. It doesn't answer. But the fig tree bends slightly as if nodding. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks believed trees were sacred, not just symbols, but actual vessels for divine presence. The fig tree in particular was associated with fertility knowledge and in some older cults, weather magic. Offerings were often made by wrapping cloth around its trunk or whispering secrets into its bark. Fringe tidbit. There's one inscription from Eleusis describing a tree-born spirit who could echo dreams back to the dreamer. The text is damaged, but some scholars believe this spirit was not a nymph but a remnant of cloud, a fog that remembered. Historians still argue whether such trees were literal or metaphorical. But in the hush of midnight, it's hard to feel metaphorical about anything. Especially when the wind carries your nymph and the leaves above you rustle in sync with your heartbeat. You press your palm to the trunk. It's warm. And just for a second, your vision blurs not from tears, but from air bending slightly out of shape. You close your eyes. When you open them again, the sky is full of cloud creatures. Not monstrous, not angry, just curious. Some shaped like birds, some like boats. One like an old mask you wore in a school play. They drift slowly above the village, silent, casting soft-edged shadows over the rooftops. Nobody screams, nobody runs, because something about it feels gentle. You wonder if this is the compromise. Not a return, not a punishment, just visibility, a reminder. The clouds are here, and they remember. From across the square, a boy points up and says, "That one looks like my mother." You recognize the shape, too. You're not sure what to say, so you say nothing. In the morning, the sky is clear, and yet every puddle reflects something just a little off, like the clouds never left, just ducked into the earth for a better view. You leave a piece of bread at the base of the fig tree, and a smooth pebble, and a whisper you don't repeat, because maybe some grudges aren't made of fire. Maybe they're made of fog, slow clinging and only dangerous if ignored. But this one, it might finally be fading. You walk past the olive press still slick with morning dew and follow the dirt path that loops behind the village bathhouse. Nobody else takes this route. The ground is uneven. The wind carries a sulfurous tang from an old dried-up spring. But tonight something draws you back here, something you're not quite ready to explain. The scent hits first. Not sulfur this time, but burnt myrrh. Thick, sweet, clinging to your nostrils like velvet soaked in resin. You round the corner and freeze. Something has drawn a shape into the dirt. It's simple, a spiral marked with feathers, olive pits, and one terribly out-of-place chicken foot. Your first instinct: blame the kids. Your second instinct: absolutely not the kids. Mainstream historical fact. In parts of ancient Greece especially, rural villages outside Athens, minor rituals were performed at night to ward off wandering spirits or idola. These weren't grand temple ceremonies, but quiet, often solitary acts, a whispered chant, a bowl of water left uncovered, a spiral scratched with a stick. Fringe tidbit. One obscure local practice involved invoking Hera through reverse offerings, giving her the opposite of what she liked. Instead of fragrant lilies, they offered onions. Instead of wine vinegar. Some believed this pleased her more as it acknowledged her bitterness and ancient rage rather than trying to mask it. Historians still argue whether these shadowy rites were ever sanctioned or merely peasant improvisations. But evidence from broken amphorae and rural graffiti suggests they were both widespread and deeply personal. You kneel beside the spiral. Something shifts in the trees behind you. Not footsteps, not wind, just presence. You murmur, "That wasn't meant for me." And the air tightens around your throat, not choking, just narrowing. You glance at the chicken foot. It points toward the old goat path. A nudge, maybe, so you follow, up the path. Past the fallen arch where moss now blooms like lazy constellations. Past the leaning stone wall that smells like wet coins. And there she is, a woman-shaped shadow perched on a boulder hair, coiled like a hive of angry bees' robes that shimmer with every color you forget in dreams. She watches you. You freeze again. And then you do something very stupid. You wave. To your credit, it's a slow, respectful wave. The kind you'd give your boss on a surprise visit or your ex's mom at the grocery store. She doesn't wave back, but she does tilt her head. And suddenly, the temperature drops not cold, just emptied. As if warmth was a curtain, and she pulled it back to reveal something ancient beneath. Her voice arrives in your chest before your ears. She doesn't speak words, more like memory. The kind that hits when you smell your childhood blanket or hear the jingle from a show that only aired once. You understand her perfectly. She's tired. Not angry, not wrathful, just exhausted from being invoked, misinterpreted, blamed, and left out of the punchlines. Grudges she says or thinks don't feed themselves. And then she does something you'll never forget. She flicks her wrist, and the sky bends. Only for a second, like someone tugged on a curtain behind the stars. And the clouds rearrange into something new. Not animals, not masks, words. A message spelled in slow drifting vapor. You don't read it aloud. You don't need to, because you already know what it says. You were listening, that's enough. And just like that, she's gone. Not vanished, released. Like a grudge finally exhaled. You sit there alone again, unsure whether to laugh or cry or find a towel. Instead, you whisper thank you just to be safe. And the clouds wink. You don't remember standing. One moment you're kneeling beside the spiral, the next you're halfway back to the village dust on your fingertips, knees aching, mind softly rattling like a jar with a loose lid. The sky is back to normal, not a word in sight. You cross a sleepy olive grove. Branches bow under their own weight, and you swear one of them nods at you. A joke, maybe. Or maybe this is just how the world winks when it knows something you don't. Back in the village square, things remain blissfully unremarkable. A cat walks across a tiled roof with the self-importance of a minor god. Somewhere, someone sneezes. You settle on a marble bench that still remembers the heat of afternoon sun. And now, for the first time in hours, you allow yourself to breathe. Let's talk theater. Mainstream historical fact. The Theater of Dionysus in Athens, an enormous open-air stone amphitheater carved into the southern slope of the Acropolis, was one of the earliest and most influential performance spaces in human history. It hosted tragedies, comedies, and sacred rituals in honor of Dionysus, the god of wine revelry, and occasional dramatic breakdowns. Fringe tidbit. A very old local tradition whispered that the first time Dionysus ever saw a play, it was just two satyrs arguing under a fig tree. The god laughed so hard he claimed the land under his feet and declared it a sacred space for ridiculousness. Within a generation, theater had become a form of worship, which if you've ever seen a wine-drunk audience boo an actor makes complete sense. Historians still argue whether the earliest dramas were meant to be instructive morality tales or just gory soap operas for sandal-wearing drama queens. Either way, they stuck. You remember now Hera didn't just loathe Zeus's antics, she hated how public they were. You picture her in the back row of the amphitheater, arms crossed, muttering curses under her breath, while the audience roared with laughter at some bawdy parody of Olympus. And maybe that's why she punished the cloud. Because a joke made once in private is just irritation. But a joke repeated, that's humiliation. Back in your sleepy corner of Greece, someone lights a lantern. It casts a honey-colored glow across the street. You notice the shadows now, they're longer, more thoughtful. You close your eyes, and she's there again. Not Hera, no, not this time. But the idea of her. The impression. The same way a perfume lingers on a scarf you haven't worn in months. You hear a whisper. Not a word this time. Just the exhale of someone who's finally given up being angry. Theatrics, after all, were never Hera's thing. But stillness. Restraint, silent judgment. That was her true stage. And as the stars flicker back into their usual chaotic patterns, you wonder if she'd ever sit through a comedy again. Maybe you think, but only if it wasn't about her. You drift toward the temple ruins again, not because you're chasing anything, but because your feet seem to remember better than your mind. They tap out the rhythm of well-worn stones shuffling along a path older than memory and just as unreliable. By now, the clouds have given up performing. They lounge across the sky like disinterested critics who've already seen this play 100 times. So let's rewind. Not to the beginning, but to the part where Hera really starts holding her grudge. You know how the story goes. Zeus falls in love with Io, a mortal priestess of Hera's own temple. To hide the affair, he turns Io into a cow. And when Hera gets suspicious, he gifts her the cow, which is bold, even for Zeus. But Hera isn't fooled. She accepts the cow with a smile sharp enough to skin olives, then posts Argus, her loyal servant with 100 eyes to guard Io 24/7. Mainstream historical fact. In Greek myth, Argus Panoptes was Hera's watchman, famed for having eyes all over his body, only a few of which ever slept at once. He was the original security system, the prototype for always watching. His name literally means all-seeing. Fringe tidbit. Some vase paintings suggest Argus wasn't just a guy with extra eyes. He may have had peacock feathers growing directly from his shoulders, which makes him either majestic or deeply uncomfortable at dinner parties. Later stories claim Hera memorialized him by placing his eyes on the tail of a peacock, turning him from man to metaphor. Historians still argue whether Argus was originally a full-blown god, a demigod, or just some poor soul born during mythology's experimental phase. You know, the one where give him 100 eyes and 0 chill felt like a character development win. But here's the part you're not supposed to say out loud. Hera wasn't angry because of Zeus's wandering heart. She was angry because no one ever chose her. Zeus chose mortals, nymphs, and occasionally disguised trees. Mortals chose Aphrodite. The poets chose Athena. Even the playwrights wrote tragedies for Dionysus. And Hera, she was the footnote, the scorned wife, the punchline. No one writes songs for goddesses who stay, except maybe you. You walk a little farther and the night seems to quiet with every step. The crickets hush like an orchestra, cued for intermission. Even the breeze gets shy. Up ahead, the temple remains lean into one another, crumbled marble-chipped columns, half a wall shaped like a broken thought. You stand in the center, toes brushing faded mosaic. And then you do the most theatrical thing of all, you wait. No demands, no questions, just you, the moonlight, and a goddess whose reputation deserves at least one rewrite. She doesn't appear. Of course not. But the silence, it feels full. Not like something's coming, like something already forgave you. A pebble shifts under your heel as though reminding you you're not part of the myth. Not really, but here you are clinging to its edges like moss to a ruin. Still standing in Hera's forgotten courtyard, you lean on a sun-warmed stone that's long since cooled. The mosaic beneath you depicts a peacock mid-strut. Its tail fanned out its eye spots like coins tossed in a fountain. Argus lives there now in color and curl. Let's not get too sentimental. You're still in ancient Greece, which means sooner or later, someone's going to get transformed into a tree, tricked into marriage, or eaten by something with 6 heads. Tonight we return to the cow. Io, still trapped in her 4-legged disguise, is guarded by Argus. But Zeus, being Zeus, decides this injustice is less troubling than inconvenient. So he calls on Hermes, god of clever fingers, winged sandals, and occasional jazz flute solos. Mainstream historical fact. Hermes was the messenger god, yes, but he also played the lyre, invented dice, and escorted souls to the underworld. Think FedEx with a lute and a touch of existential dread. Quirky detail. One version of the myth has Hermes lulling Argus to sleep by telling him the world's most boring story, a long, winding tale about a river that forgets how to flow. It's the kind of story designed to put even 100 eyeballs to sleep, which honestly makes Hermes the patron saint of this channel. Historians still argue whether Hermes actually lulled Argus with music storytelling or just really intense eye contact. The version you hear depends on the poet, the painter, or the level of wine consumed at the time. Anyway, once Argus is fully snoozed out, Hermes does what myths always do next: he slays the guardian. With Argus gone, Io is free-ish. Because freedom in mythology tends to come with extra steps. Hera finds out. Hera always finds out. And she's not about to let Zeus off the hook with a sulky apology and a thunderbolt emoji. So she sends a gadfly, a tiny winged agent of chaos, to sting Io endlessly. Buzz, bite, sting, repeat. Not a lion, not a curse, not a vengeful tide, just a bug. And somehow that's worse. You imagine Io wandering across the known world, tail swatting, hooves dragging. From Egypt to the Ionian coast, from memory to misinterpretation, she roams. Her tears fall in places that later become sacred wells. Her hoofprints mark maps that haven't been drawn yet. And Hera just watches. Not from Olympus, not from a cloud, but from every eye on every feather of every peacock that struts through history like it owns the garden. Eventually, Io reaches Egypt. There she regains her form and surprise gives birth to a line of kings and heroes, one of whom, centuries later, conquers Greece. Poetic, isn't it? A cow runs from a god, dodges a grudge, crosses oceans, and her descendants take the land back. Even Hera might have smirked at that. You step out of the ruins now. The air carries a lemony chill, the kind that citrus groves exhale after dark. Somewhere an owl lets out a one-note opera. You stretch your arms and whisper a thank you not to Zeus or Hermes but to Io. Because running isn't weakness, it's survival. And surviving in a world ruled by petty immortals is the bravest myth of all. You wander downhill now, following a sliver of moonlight tracing a dusty footpath, as though you're being tugged gently through time by a half-remembered story. Behind you, Hera's Grudge. Ahead, a city built on irony. You arrive at Athens, well, not yet Athens technically. Still unnamed, still unclaimed. Just a rocky outcrop full of olives and potential. And two gods with egos the size of Mount Olympus both want it. Poseidon, lord of sea-foam tridents and unsolicited waves, arrives first. He stomps his trident into the dry stone and whoosh up bursts a saltwater spring. Locals blink. The water looks dramatic, smells like anchovies, tastes like disappointment. Then comes Athena, calm, calculating, and eternally underappreciated. Instead of theatrics, she kneels and plants something. A seed. She doesn't summon a dragon. She doesn't start a flood. She just waits. And in that silent stillness, an olive tree begins to grow. Mainstream historical fact. Olive trees were the backbone of ancient Greek economy. Oil was used for cooking, lighting lamps, cleaning skin, and even as prize money in Panathenaic games. Yes, literal jars of oil were handed out like ancient gift cards. Quirky tidbit. Some Athenians claimed the exact original olive tree from Athena's gift stood on the Acropolis for centuries, blasted by invaders, regrown from the root, a sort of botanical phoenix with sass. Historians still argue whether the contest between Poseidon and Athena symbolized a real political shift, one where sea power lost favor to agricultural self-sufficiency. Or maybe it was just an origin myth written to justify naming a city after a goddess, rather than a guy who throws waves like tantrums. Anyway, the people choose Athena's gift. Sensible, useful, renewable. You can't eat a saltwater spring. You can export olives and brag about your tree. Poseidon is not thrilled. He floods part of the city in a fit of divine pettiness. Honestly, you can almost hear the ancient version of fine. Keep your stupid olives. But Athena. She names the city. Athens sets up a temple and becomes its eternal guardian. You stroll past the Parthenon ghostlight, flickering across marble columns like the afterimage of candle smoke. You wonder what it must have felt like knowing your city chose wisdom over wrath. That your goddess brought a tree instead of a sword. And Hera, well, she probably didn't send a card, but she had to respect it. For once, a woman didn't lose the spotlight to a thunderbolt or a trident. She won with a tree. And if you look closely, you can still find that olive tree. Gnarled, wrinkled, but stubbornly alive. Just like the myths themselves, you continue walking under a sky that's now pulsing with sleepy constellations. Orion reclines sideways as if he too is tired of the drama. You pass through an olive grove, the leaves whispering secrets between breezes, each tree older than most cities. Somewhere between the rustle and the roots, another story unfurls, one even cloudier than the rest, wrapped in fog and mischief. It involves a certain golden apple and a wedding invitation that left Hera feeling some kind of way. Let's rewind. There's a wedding Thetis and Peleus destined to birth Achilles. Everyone's invited except one goddess, Eris, the personification of chaos and pettiness. So naturally, she shows up anyway, uninvited and extra. And instead of throwing rice or bringing a blender like a normal guest, she hurls a golden apple into the party, inscribed on it, "To the fairest." Classic. Athena, Aphrodite, and Hera all reach for it like it's the last slice of baklava. Nobody wants to back down. Mainstream historical fact. This infamous judgment of Paris myth is often cited as the mythical spark for the Trojan War. One apple, three goddesses, one really confused mortal dude, Paris of Troy. Who has to decide who's the most beautiful? Fringe tidbit. Some fringe scholars joke that the whole Apple of Discord scenario may have been satire. A myth meant to poke fun at how divine beings act worse than soap opera characters. If Zeus had invented reality TV, this would have been his pilot. Historians still argue whether this myth was politically symbolic, a commentary on intercity rivalries, or even a metaphor for shifting alliances. Or maybe it's just a cautionary tale. Never host a party where the goddess of spite isn't welcome. Paris picks Aphrodite, lured by her promise of the most beautiful woman in the world. And Hera, oh, she remembers. For centuries. You walk through shadowy ruins now. Maybe the remains of Troy, maybe just the echo of stories built on pettiness. The wind carries Hera's saigami sin minwanin, Oedipus high across broken columns. Because here's the thing about Hera she doesn't forget. Not the apple. Not Zeus's business trips. Not clouds pretending to be mistresses. She is divine memory incarnate, eternal brooding with an ironclad grudge folder in her mind palace. And in a strange way, there's comfort in that. Hera might be the only Olympian who doesn't let things slide. In a world where everyone else is throwing lightning or seducing mortals disguised as bulls, at least someone's keeping score. You step over a scatter of olive pits underfoot like breadcrumbs left by history. The apple might have vanished, but its echo still rattles through time. Through wars. Through myths. Through Hera's narrowed eyes. The trees thin out now, replaced by a gentle slope of marble fragments and dried laurels. The wind feels softer here, as if it knows the story's winding down. But before the stars tuck themselves in, there's one last thread to follow the aftermath. Because Hera didn't just glare and let it go. Oh no. Once Paris chose Aphrodite, Hera declared herself permanently unamused. Every little event that spiraled from that choice, the seduction of Helen, the launch of 1,000 ships, the siege of Troy, she watched it unfold like a theater critic with a grudge and a clipboard. Mainstream historical fact. In many classical plays, Hera's lingering resentment shaped entire arcs. In Euripides' works, her presence looms over every mortal misstep. Even when she's not physically there, her will is felt like a pressure system in the plot. Fringe tidbit. Some old commentaries whispered that Hera's true power wasn't thunder or wrath. It was the long game. Unlike Zeus, whose tantrums were loud and short-lived, Hera brewed her fury low and slow. Think crockpot vengeance with a hint of divine seasoning. Historians still argue whether Hera's portrayals over time were shaped by evolving gender norms. Was she vilified because she resisted her role as a silent, obedient wife? Or because the scribes genuinely feared her righteous retribution? You step now into a place that feels almost like sleep, a grove gone silent, a sky rippling with dream-thin clouds, and in the distance, through time's blur, you almost catch a glint of gold. Not from an apple this time. Just the reflection of moonlight on a polished temple step worn smooth by centuries of barefoot priests who remembered to whisper her name with respect. And now, let's soften everything. You sink into the quiet. Now, where stories flatten into warm breath and the olive-scented air curls gently around your limbs. Each breath you take feels like settling, like silk draping over tired thoughts. Imagine Hera not as a goddess scorned, but as a still shape at the center of memory, eyes closed, chin tilted to the stars, finally unmoved. The myths may carry thunder, but the silence after the story is its own kind of peace. You picture a marble bench half cracked, but still standing, just waiting for you to rest your back against it. The moonlight is soft. The clouds drift unbothered. No grudges tonight, no jealousies. Just the hush between waves of memory where nothing chases you and everything is held gently. Let your mind curl around that. Let go of gods and apples and ancient weddings. You've heard the whole thing now. Every whisper, every spiteful glance, and still the night forgives. Your eyelids feel like temple doors gently closing. The myths are quiet now, and so are you.